very happy to be here, and thanks for having me. I am a former UN creative director, and I founded the UN's Virtual Reality Lab in January 2015. And I know Mike and TechCrunch because when we debuted the film at Davos, Mike was one of the first people to watch the film and to break the story and really to get the word out of what we were trying to do. How many of you here have tried VR, virtual reality? That's cool. That's actually very encouraging. You know, VR has been sold to have a lot of promise, and 3 years ago when I was looking to do something in it, it wasn't obvious that it could be useful for social issues. People were saying that it would be about gaming or entertainment, and there were a lot of things with roller coasters. And I had this crazy idea that, you know, there was something about this technology that could take us somewhere, and we can understand issues better. So the first film I did was Clouds Over Sidra, and it was about a 12-year-old girl named Sidra in Zatari refugee camp. So I just want to take you through, this talk usually is 3 parts, and I'll just go through probably the first 2 in the interest of time. So when I was able to be very fortunate to be one of the first people to have a VR camera to then tell these stories and to do something, it was obvious of what we would try to do. And automatically I knew, one, I didn't want to do it the way general UN stories are told. Because if you go and you see a lot of what is done by the UN or NGOs, I also studied filmmaking undergrad. I just felt a lot of it was not very effective and was boring, and I don't think that's a controversial statement. So second, I knew that this was a very visceral type of medium, and that in some ways there was a greater responsibility. And right away people said, if only you could show people suffering, if only you can let people know what's going on, that you can make a difference. And that intuitively didn't make sense to me. And a lot of that came from my sort of reading and my sort of admiration for a thinker called Susan Sontag, who wrote regarding the pain of others. And that's why I say about representing the pain in others in this part, because she was talking about photography. Because when photography came on the scene, it was very similar to what was happening when virtual reality was coming, or different visual media. There was, again, this thing of, let's just show people suffering, rather than doing something, I think, a little bit different, a little bit more subtle. So I don't have my presenter mode laptop. I'm not going to complain, so I have to just kind of go through here. First, just to start, a lot of people, when I proposed that we would put these headsets on world leaders in Davos, or we would do this, I think a lot of people felt it was incredibly unnatural, or there are always these arguments about real reality and what's in it with VR, and it's very disconcerting for people. But as humans, we've been doing this from the beginning, with cave paintings and abstractions and storytelling. So rather than you being in the cave is now on your face. So you just have to deal with that. This is leading up to the Napoleonic era, right before the advent of photography. And this is considered war painting peak, where, again, there's this need to really understand what's happening in the battlefield or where places can't go. And it's very interesting because war painting peak happens when monarchs stopped going into the battlefield and wanting to have more information. And I think it's that disconnect and that thing with photography that really comes into it. This is one of the first photographs during the American Civil War. If you look out into the distance, again, that's a battlefield. And these are, politicians, civilians, and journalists. And the camera is is starting to make its way. It's starting to wanting to go to the center of the action, because the intuition is that if we went there, we would make better decisions. Maybe we would stop war. Maybe we wouldn't do it. But if this talk has a bit of a thesis, that's not enough. And I wanted to go through a little bit why. If this thing could work. Again, now it goes into there's some graphic images in this, so I apologize. Now this is another example of one of the earliest photographs, trying to show what was happening. And again, a lot of pacifists were using this and saying, look how horrible this is. We need to make it stop. So, it's a very interesting book that you could check out. It's by Alex Gardner. And, it really, here are the dreadful details. Let them aid in preventing such another calamity falling upon the nation. But it doesn't work, and each time, each new medium is trying to represent this violence and suffering and displacement in a different way. Many people could say that World War I was the first photographed war. Vietnam, kind of, with television. Syria, is very interesting because it has all this user-generated YouTube content that's actually quite fascinating. And again, quite horrifying, too. And, with Black Lives Matter, it was the first time that you had a live killing on social media. And again, the intuition is, if more people can see this, things will stop. This is, again, another really interesting book called War Against War. It's 40 of the most gruesome pictures from World War I. Was in 10 editions in Germany, a bestseller in Germany in 1930, and did nothing to prevent what came later. And Susan Sontag goes deep. And again, this is just some example of some Vietnam footage, similarly sensational. This is an example. I won't play too much of this because it is horrifying. You can go on YouTube and you can see it. And I talked to a lot of Syrian activists or white helmets, and they also say, let the world see this because it would prevent it. But that doesn't work. That doesn't work. Why? Why? Well, we grow numb to these things, and I think that's obvious, but I think we have to understand that we're probably exposed to more pain and suffering through our social media feeds and media than ever before, and it doesn't necessarily lead to action, in that way. And, I think a lot of this, a lot of learning of what can work, is in other fields, and it's interesting and it's important to be cross-disciplinary. In health, getting people to change behavior, they've shown that those types of very dramatic, difficult images, they scare you, and they paralyze you, and they don't necessarily help you. They can actually hurt, and there's a lot of that evidence. So why would we think in showing horrible things about refugees or conflict that it would work? But we continue to make that same mistake. But some of the ones that are effective are, something like this, where it's about a metaphor, where your brain is an egg being fried. And this is an example. This is very funny in the United States. I know we're in France, but this is a funny talk, so you should laugh too. Don't be afraid. I'll make you laugh here. Look at this. Isn't this genius? It can be an iPhone. So again, a lot of it is that passivity, and using metaphor, using abstraction in storytelling through media seems to be something that's important to take into account. So it wasn't enough that I would just take this camera and plop it down and just show people in despair, and that's not what Clouds Over Cedar does, and that's not what a lot of the other work does. And I think it's even more important in VR because you don't have passivity. You actually challenge that passivity a lot because now you have some agency and you can now walk around certain VR experiences. And so I think that's something that's going to be very important to think about. Again, everyone knows, I have a feeling this is skipping a slide each time, but it's fine. Again, this type of images, how often can you see it without it stop having its effect? Now, even UNICEF took that approach and made similar mistakes where there was, bodies of skeletal children and things of the Ethiopian famine in the 80s. But if you go, this is actually really...
10 million third world
this is
children
actually
don't live
something
to see
from that
their
era,
third
too. You could just
birthday.
really watch it.
Those who do live beyond that ripe old age here will grow up in dung heaps like this. Happy birthday. I've been asked if I've ever gotten used to this misery. How does a human being with a heart get used to this? The heartbreaking crying of a 2-year-old so undernourished her teeth are coming loose.
Okay, I think you get the point. That was acceptable form of representing those things. And it's not the way things are done now, and it's not the way UNICEF does things now either. And I think the result of it is not just because of human dignity, it's just of efficacy. It stops working. I think it's a lot more interesting when you have things that are more nuanced. So if you go to a UNICEF site now, you have some smiling children. It actually has the names of people in the photographs. It actually has a lot of their stories. And I think for people, you end up having a different relationship when there's some sort of storytelling there. Why else doesn't it work just to show shocking, sensational things, whether in VR or anything? We also have a very lustful relationship to violence. And what do I mean by that? I think, when there's an accident on a highway, so many people will stop to see it, but they won't necessarily stop to do anything. And, a lot of our media, whether it's Clockwork Orange or a lot of other ways of what gets people excited, it can have it doesn't necessarily lead to action. It's just something that we have this strange, complex relationship to it. So you can, in some ways, inadvertently, by showing terrible things, you can just feed someone's sort of relationship with that, rather than it being something that you think would motivate them. Lastly, it can be exploited. And what do I mean by that? I can show you a picture of an African American being killed, and you would be horrified because I'm assuming you're not a racist. But for a racist or somebody who doesn't, sees them as the enemy or sees other people in a different way, it can be a very good thing. And in some ways, it doesn't do any good by just showing horrible things, because I think some people, and I think, a lot of Syrian rebels use YouTube and horrible things on there to show and to motivate their own troops, to show revenge. The same thing can have different contexts, and this is, just a little bit of like an absurd example of what it can mean in Gaza, because they're not looking at it in the same way someone else would. They're looking at it through the context of war. The same picture of Aylan was used that motivated, in the beginning, Europe to think about refugees, was used by ISIS itself to say, this is what happens if you leave, and it's interesting that same image of sensational, horrible things has this other purpose. So if you don't do that, it's less likely for that to happen. Sensational, shocking pictures, they kill storytelling. Some of the best examples that I've really admired is to show a documentary which uses no archival footage and really just builds a story, uses testimony. I think a lot of these things paralyze the imagination, and without imagination, there's no empathy. I've gone a long way. This is a VR talk, and just to give you a sense of why I start out with usually this, is because most people just focus on the technology. They don't realize that there is a philosophy, that there is a thought process behind how we think about building that empathy, that virtual reality is a part of that, and it can be very powerful, and I believe in the empathy machine type of possibility, but it's not in of itself the technology. It's in of itself the technology married with a particular type of storytelling we've been experimenting with, which can have and show more results. I don't want to leave you with no good examples of things. I think Silvered Water is an incredible film that uses that storytelling. This is an example of not having to show horrible things, but making you use your imagination and go a little bit deeper in it. These are some pictures from Poland. My most recent experience is on the Holocaust called The Last Goodbye, which was recently at the Venice Film Festival. And in just looking at this, the caption next to it was, "This is the last moment captured of people before they go into a gas chamber." So you look at this different, you have different goosebumps if you provide context and how you do. You know, Mouse is an incredible graphic novel where there was this sort of artistic decision to make Jewish people be vermin and to have Polish people be pigs and to have the Germans be cats. And, you know, in a lot of ways, you know, if you read that, that artistic decision of using abstraction and storytelling makes it so much more powerful for some reason than if it was just photorealistic. So it's important to think about those things as well. Okay, so a lot of it, I'm going to maybe go through this a bit because I want to show you a little bit of the context of why we did this. You know, I was at the UN, good at a lot of things, but I don't think it's very good at transitioning quickly to what's happening in the world. And when I was there, we had a very standard approach if we wanted to do advocacy. We wrote an op-ed, you know, called these celebrities, you know, and really tried to get the word out that way. But the world was changing, you know. Even our YouTube channel, even now, it's very abysmal on how it works. And like, if you look at it yourself, we should see why. We should explore why it is. And I didn't want to do that with the VR work, you know. These are some of the views you have, and because it's about such exciting things as the UN appeals. I mean, if you go through it, it's about the UN, it's about these processes, it's more focused to donors. Things get a little better if you get Angelina Jolie, you know, involved, right? But we're really up against, you know, stuff like this. And the hypothesis is, you know, can people care in the same way that they care about this for our work? And some of my earlier work was a video for the Climate Change Summit on the Amazon rainforest and its relationship with oil exploration and climate change. And again, you know, I said we're going to strip it down and we're going to really just make it about the person. And it's a very simple thing, but it was a very radical concept, and it ended up getting almost 2 million views. And you know, a lot of my sort of thing was I worked and produced Brandon Stanton's Humans of New York tour. And this one dude, this one guy, has more followers than all of the UN's social media accounts combined. One guy, okay? And I was like, well, we should work with him, and we should be on his platform, and we should learn what he's doing. And a lot of, you know, that, you know, his sort of storytelling is some of the most viral on the internet, and I was happy that we were able to do that for some of our issues, and a lot of it has influenced a lot of the VR things. But coming to VR, you know, often called the empathy machine, and this is Cedra. And, you know, it's really important to think about what we mean by empathy and how VR can propagate it. And so just with my team and thinking, we always just put through a little bit of like, I know there's a dictionary that tells you what empathy is, but I think it's important to go through a thought process a little bit of what our sort of values were. And I think this gives you a sense of what we're trying to do if you have experienced the film. Why virtual reality at the UN? You know, so right away when I wanted to do this, they were like, you're stupid, you're crazy, you're building an experience that's not going to scale. It's for rich people, it's on an expensive headset. And the craziest thing was, even when I made this, I didn't even know how we were gonna get headsets. And in Davos, we called up Samsung, and they flew a team of 8 people, you know, to bring 150 headsets for kings and queens and decision makers. And initially, the thought was for it to be about decision makers. And I just said, look, it's limited, but if we can influence the people making these decisions, because that's how our world works right now, I think let's play on that. But at some point, that's not enough. We have to make it scale. So I wanted to play this video because it was don't play it yet, but it was the first time I thought, what if we, with UNICEF, partnered with their face-to-face fundraisers? Because it's one of the biggest forms of fundraising for UNICEF is those people on the streets that stop you. And they have them in 40 different countries in 15 different languages. So we sent it out to test it in New Zealand. And these are the actual volunteers and people working for UNICEF who are young kids who are asking for money. And so we made them watch it. And I got this video back after they saw Clouds over Cedra. And I think it's really important because it gave me a sense that this was something that could be big, that we could integrate it with these face-to-face fundraisers and maybe make a difference. So we can play this, or do I push it, or do you push it?
The girl in the video was only like a few years younger than me, and the boys running around were my brother's age.
It gave me a real sense of appreciation for what I've got here.
I felt as if I was actually there, and I could actually feel the pain of the children and their suffering.
Made the people seem so alive, and I think that's really important with this. The people have to be alive in order for change to happen.
It was something that I don't want to believe is happening, but I can't ignore it anymore.
I knew about what was going on, but I didn't really know the extent of everything that happened there.
Open one arm and then the other, and then walk towards a person and then hug them.
What are you doing? Like, why are basic human rights still being denied in the 21st century? Why are there still people falling dead on the streets? Why do humans feel the need for war?
My sorrow is one based on, me coming to school when it's raining. For them, it's not even being able to go to school.
Yeah, it really makes you feel for what's happening in that situation.
They said that it will kind of pass, like the clouds, and I thought that was really inspiring.
How they can just find happiness in a place where there's not going to be much.
These were other girls like me going through it and actually thinking and feeling how they are feeling.
There's just so much children who need our help, and so much people we need to reach out to.
So, we ended up, I want to just forward one thing because it shows you, this is interesting. So then this is what it looks like when we gave like a cheaper set of headsets with these people who are asking for donations. Now, it's fascinating. We have the data of what people usually give without virtual reality. It's 1 in 12 people when they're stopped on the streets will give, it's kind of consistent, bizarrely enough, across a lot of countries and places. And so 1 in 12 people when stopped will give money to UNICEF. I cut the film down to 4 minutes, and we did this, and we measured it, and it led to 1 in 6. So it doubled the rates of donations, and each donation was actually of a greater sum on a monthly bill with a credit card. So it was a real kind of revolution for fundraising and for thinking. Unfortunately, because it is the UN and they do make a lot of mistakes, they were like, thanks, Gabo, that was great, and we're going to now make like our own VR films. And I think they didn't take the first part of my lecture seriously, because they basically then started doing their boring, regular, stuff with it without actually thinking about what can be done. So, going forward, I think money is important, but for instance, I did a film called My Mother's Wing on Gaza, and it's not just about money, but it's about changing mindsets, about it was shown on the streets of Tel Aviv, and really was a way to get people to understand what's happening on the other side of a conflict. So there are many different ways. My time is over. I just want to say that you should all think about these new immersive tech ways of being creative and different ways. It's an incredible revolution happening in VR, AR, AI, and there's just a lot more we can do. So this is just, I think, the tip of it, and we're going to continue to do more, and that's what I'll be doing. So if anyone wants to talk, we can talk later. Thank you for having me.